Greetings. Today I'm going to be covering the topic of freedom versus efficiency in the context of society and political systems, and indeed civilization. And I do want to incorporate a question that Raging Golden Eagle had posed in the comment section on my video, The Elephant in the Room. And Sir Golden Eagle, I wasn't ignoring the question, though I didn't answer it directly in the comment section, but I did think it was an important question, important enough to be subsumed into the larger context of the video I'm making now. So for the purposes of that, I want to read off his question and talk a little bit about that, as well as the bigger context of what I essentially refer to as the price of freedom. So here is Raging Golden Eagle's question on my video. I would like to hear your thoughts on the following. You pointed out at the end of your video that if we were all rational, we could fix and improve the world, improve the world, because we could see reality as it is. But we can't, since most people not only are not rational and don't want to be. The way adaptation and evolution is supposed to work is that those who are best suited to their current environment survive and reproduce way more than those that are less suited. Right now it seems irrational people are far outbreeding the rational ones. In fact, a large chunk of rational people would rather not bring a kid into this world. I believe the problem is that we as a society in the Western world have created an environment that favors those less suited. They can breed without a care in the world, always quick to scream they have a right to reproduce, and that's in quotes, and shortly after that demanding that you, capitalize you, pay for the kids they can't afford. How would we go about fixing this? Is it even possible without going full moonraker? And even if we did, how long until we just created the exact same situation again? Thoughtful question, but I think it's part of a bigger debate, if we want to call it that, that I'm going to address in this video. Now, there are a couple of things in this question that I want to dissect. One is, this is sometimes, I'm not suggesting this is what Raging Golden Eagle was suggesting, he merely pointed this out, that because Darwinian evolution works a certain way, we should make an effort to best imitate it in our practices of politics and crafting a society, which is to say, this is the way Darwinian evolution works, a kind of social Darwinism, if you will. Now, I'm actually going to argue against that in this video for a number of reasons that I'll have to go into, but I wanted to say at the outset that I do not actually endorse any of the things I'm going to be talking about, and I have to make that explicitly clear. In fact, I'm going to say that the things I'm going to talk about in this video could be potentially disturbing, but I don't want to live in that society, and I'll give you reasons why. And the reasons I give are related to the conclusions you can draw from Golden Eagle's question, but it's like I said, I find the question to be part of a bigger question. The question to be addressed here is the question of freedom versus efficiency. Long have we labored under the notion that the best possible world is the world of quote-unquote liberal democracy, and I admit that's a rather poorly defined term, but it's so generic and has become such a household item that you could argue that everyone has a kind of vague, more than vague notion of what that actually means. So liberal democracy, the kind of society we're living in, give or take a couple of things. But as I pointed out in my videos, as Golden Eagle points out, that this often leads to a less than efficient model in the world. He points out, as I have pointed out, that most people are not rational. Most people are not interested in scientific progress per se, and this is, of course, not the most efficient thing to be had if you want a society that makes progress, a progressive society, not in the political sense, but one that actually makes progress. Now, there have been a lot of philosophical thought experiments talked about in the past with regards to this, but we have to be at least partially intellectually honest with ourselves in acknowledging that there are other models of civilization and society that would be far more efficient than the quote-unquote liberal democracy that we live in today. Nonetheless, not models that the majority of us would want to live in, including myself. I'm going to list some of these possibilities to give you an idea. whet the imagination, but I don't want to live in these places. So let's take the scenario of the extreme end of utilitarian ethics. And this has been talked about by other people in the past, but I'll point it out again in case you're not familiar with the scenario. So you walk into a hospital, and there are 4 or 5 different patients on the waiting list for organ donation. They need organ donors, and they each need different organs. One needs liver, the other needs a kidney, someone else needs maybe an epidermal transplantation, who knows. And there's a guy there sitting in the waiting room, and routine checkup, by all accounts, he's healthy. And in the most efficient sense of utilitarian ethics, the person, the healthy man waiting to be checked up, is essentially kidnapped, anesthetized, vivisected, his organs harvested and left to die, because by doing that you're able to save 4 or 5 other people. Now, few would deny, including myself, that that is a very efficient model of practicing medicine. A bunch of sick, unhealthy people, one healthy person, subtract one guy, save 4. And in some sense, we do practice, there's triage in medicine. You attend to the patients with the most pressing needs, but that is a very extreme expression of utilitarian ethics and the greatest happiness for the greatest number, taken to an absurd end. Why do I say it's absurd? Because frankly speaking, most of us, including myself, wouldn't want to live in that society where on a whim a doctor could kidnap you, whisk you away to an operating table, and essentially murder you in an effort to harvest your organs to give them to other people simply because there are a bunch of people on a waiting list. That would be a society where hospital visits, doctor visits would be very unstable, to put it euphemistically, and really not a place people would feel comfortable, minus the fact that most people don't feel comfortable in a hospital to begin with. But it's an extreme example of something that would be very efficient, but not something I could personally endorse. And I suspect most of you wouldn't want to live in a society where you could be vivisected at will, because in doing so you could save a whole bunch of people at the cost of your own life. So I wanted to introduce that one example because it's a very clear example of, yes, we can create more efficient situations, and I think by extension more efficient societies, but we, of course, lose something in the process. So another hypothetical example I can give that would, of course, correct the problem, if you will, that Raging Golden Eagle brings up in his commentary, is we could very well create some sort of scientific autocracy, a technocracy, if you will, where you have a kind of scientific potentate, an autocrat, maybe a few underlings who address various subdivisions of this technocracy or this scientific autocracy, and it would essentially be a dictatorship, obviously, and everything in the society would be directed towards scientific progress, in the sense that there would be no use of frivolous time or no engagement in frivolous activity. In this hypothetical world of scientific autocracy, neither Raging Golden Eagle nor I could partake in our hobby. So what Raging Golden Eagle likes to do with his anime and doll collection, well, that would be frivolous, so he couldn't do that. Me liking playing video games, frivolous, couldn't do that. Every person in the society, whether high or low, dumb or smart, would somehow be integrated into the larger project of making scientific progress and propelling the human race forward. I have no doubt that when you move away from the distractions of Twitter and all this other crap that we tend to engage in our modern society, yeah, we could make more progress. We could find more efficient fuel sources, supersonic commercial air flight, perhaps even colonization of space in a far shorter span of time than we currently imagine. But what would be the price of that? Well, the price would be we couldn't do what we wanted to do. And so I harbor no illusions that we could have a more efficient society. And those of you who know me, I ideally would not that kind of society, but I would like to see more scientific progress. I would like to see scientific breakthroughs that really bring us forward, rather than dealing with the same technology over and over again and making minute improvements on it. But I'm not willing to live, just as I'm not willing to live in a world where I enter a hospital and my first fear is that I'll be vivisected because, hey, three other guys need my organs. I'm not willing to live in a world where, frankly speaking, my free time and what I choose to do with it, and frankly, what I want to do with my life, job-wise, etc., is dictated by a supposedly wise and allegedly benevolent autocrat. And I should also point out that you probably couldn't even have a true scientific autocracy just because science, by its very nature, is amenable to new evidence. And to pursue that kind of dogmatic ideal, you would essentially have to inure yourself against new kinds of evidence that are presented to you. You would just have to sort of stay on track no matter what. So even that's pretty implausible. But I don't deny that it would be a lot more efficient than what we have now in so-called liberal democracy. So when we get to the question of Raging Golden Eagle about the dumb, essentially the dumb breeding and the smart not breeding and so on and so forth, yeah, I mean we could certainly design a society, and people have tried. Look, one of the mandates of National Socialism was that the handicapped and the mentally retarded essentially should be sterilized. And not only that, well, a lot of them were murdered as well. Frankly speaking, I wouldn't want to live in that kind of society. I think whatever our flaws as a species, we do have a very useful sense of morality that has evolved with us. I mean, I'm someone, for example, maybe I'm somewhat unique in this, but I feel a unique sense of obligation towards the handicapped. Sometimes if I see a blind person struggling, even if it's out of my, I have to go out of my way, I attempt to help the person, partially because sense of compassion, and otherwise that's how I would like to be treated if I were struggling in that situation. I wouldn't want to see a world where, say, the handicapped are punished merely for being handicapped. And although I think it's a bad thing, as I've talked about many times, that people who aren't culturally integrated, say, in a European society, are breeding en masse, and the local populations aren't doing that, by way of comparison, that you can't, in order to create a society where you actually have that kind of model, like some sort of Darwinian evolutionary model, which once again, just because that's the way evolution works doesn't mean that's the way we should ideally live. I wouldn't want to live in that society. I would be the kind of society where you are deprived of your individual freedoms, be it anime doll collection or gaming, or taking a walk when you feel like taking a walk, or eating what you want to eat when you don't want to. I mean, once again, another example. If we had government tyrannically mandated dietary regimes issued to us. McDonald's would shut down, Baskin and Robbins. No, you were sort of force-fed what's essentially healthy and what's good for you. Probably not excessive carbohydrates, that kind of thing. Would people be better off health-wise for it? Absolutely. Would we have fewer health problems? Absolutely. Would health costs and insurance costs go down? Almost certainly. Then again, wouldn't you be annoyed if you lived in a world where there was no ice cream to consume ever because, well, it's not good for you and the government has mandated that it not be the case? I mean, essentially, what I'm trying to illustrate here is that we do pay an enormous price for the relative sort of liberal democratic freedom that we have to essentially do what we want to do as long as we're not harming other people. The price is the price of efficiency. The same token, it's a price that I am personally willing to pay. I don't endorse, like I said, the ultimate utilitarian end of vivisecting people at a hospital, or some sort of social Darwinian experiment in society at large, or a scientific technocracy or autocracy, because frankly speaking, selfishly I suppose, that kind of system, those systems run counter to my personal interests, and indeed I would argue run counter to most people's personal interests. Even if you're, say, a devoted and hardworking scientist, I think it unlikely that you would enjoy laboring under the mandate that forced you, in the form of slavery essentially, to do certain things that you might otherwise be interested in, but the fact that you have to do it is the major difference here. So, is there an actual solution to all of this? No, I don't think so. And I think the only counter to this is something that I would say is equally undesirable, at least in the short term, not for anyone alive right now. And as Coltaine has pointed out in a fairly recent video of his, and I'll be linking to that, called An Evolutionary Termination Point, and this has been observed by others, it does seem strongly implied by all the observations we can make in history and the current climate that a world without adversity is a world where we tend to make a lot less progress than we otherwise would. The adversity of war and the destruction of war, these seem to be great propellers, if you will, of scientific progress, human progress, technological progress, and yet most of us probably would be unwise on an individual interest level to want to endorse something like World War III or, in the event, any event, massive armed conflict across the globe. Maybe some new things would be innovated, possibly, although it seems difficult to think in a world where we have nuclear weapons how that could be. But still, most of us would prefer to live our rather boring, semi-picturesque lives of idle comfort and engaging in our boring, idle hobbies. So I don't really see a solution to this. I mean, I'm not hopeful by any means. I've never expressed, I don't even like the word hope, as I've talked about many times. And ideally, and I don't think this is going to happen, we could become somewhat more efficient despite the comforts that we revel in, despite the freedoms that we have. But, probably isn't going to happen. And so we just have to make the best of what we have and sort of chug along at a relatively slow pace. We do have to, unfortunately, sacrifice efficiency for relative freedom. And I am willing to make that sacrifice. I'm not young anymore. I'll be dead soon enough. Frankly speaking, I'm not particularly invested in the hereafter. So, if people want to transform society into something like I described, where you get vivisected at the hospital because it's utilitarian or some sort of scientific technocracy, well, why not? Go for it. I won't. I won't exist anymore, so it wouldn't matter. But for the purposes of my life, and I think even Raging Golden Eagle, once again, imagine being deprived of your hobbies and you couldn't do anything in the name of efficiency. This actually I think applies to every kind of form of what we would regard as sort of a liberal society, even a libertarian one. Because one of the premises of libertarianism is that you're able to do whatever you want to do as long as you're not inflicting harm on other people. Well, arguably, that's still not the most efficient model because people are going to do things that aren't efficient, right? So I just don't really see a solution to this, but we do need to be at least partially intellectually honest about it. The fact is that, yeah, there are more efficient models. There are things that we could do that would propel us forward more quickly, but in and of themselves, for the purposes of living a peaceful and relatively safe life, I don't think it's worth dabbling in this stuff. I mean, if you look at the litany of isms that plague the 20th century, we have many of these failed experiments: National Socialism, communism, so on and so forth. It didn't really end well. They are all far too flawed, and of course you could argue that they just lack the scientific and human understanding that we have now, but we've sort of been there and done that, and it didn't really work out too well. So, as flawed and terrible as the system is now, most of us wouldn't want to live in a world where we have to worry about the doctors harvesting our organs, or we live in a regimented society where everything we eat is dictated to us and everything we do is dictated to us simply in the name of human progress. So it's a difficult balancing act, I suppose, and the only thing I can do on my end would be to continue encouraging people to think and think deeply about these things and not be afraid of the evidence and not be afraid of the results of these thought processes if they happen to be unpleasant, and sometimes they are, or at the very least they seem to run counter to what makes us feel good. I'm all for not feeling good if that's where the evidence points to, but once again we have that issue of people not really wanting to go there because contented irrationalists and all that. So as I said, I thought I wanted to address Golden Eagle's question in a larger context of efficiency versus freedom, and there you have it. I wanted to make this video anyway. So yeah, I'm willing to sacrifice certain things because I prefer to live a relatively free and unhindered life rather than a life of essentially slavery in the name purely of efficiency. And hey, maybe you disagree with me. If you do, leave a comment in the comment section. Everyone take care and enjoy the rest of your weekend or the beginning of your week. Bye-bye.